Sweet.
All right, so Doron, you've been
just looking at you, right?
Yeah, we're just having
awesome.
this conversation.
Got it.
You've been on the front lines of this thing since the beginning. Tell me how the war has progressed. What have you seen change in Gaza? This is the thing I would like you to do for us, because they won't let me in, which is a source of endless frustration.
Tell me about it.
But since they won't let me in, and my viewers are very interested in, like, what is Gaza like? What's going on in Gaza? How is the war progressing for the IDF as you've been in?
I would put it like this: Gaza is a very difficult battlefield, right? So you have what we have in Gaza is what we've seen in a few different conflicts worldwide. You have the Viet Cong in Vietnam, for example, that the Americans had to deal with, the tunnel systems. Those guys helped train Yasser Arafat's terrorists, right, years ago, and then they carried that knowledge into Gaza, and that's one of the techniques that are being used during this conflict that's different than most of the modern warfare that the U.S. has had to deal with in the, let's say, the GWAT guys that fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, 20-plus year war against terror. They had some tunnels that they had to encounter, but it's not on the same scale as what I'm saying. So what we had, just to give some context, so what we engaged in is over 640 kilometers of tunnel systems underground in Gaza in a landmass that is 42 kilometers long and about 12 to 14 kilometers wide. So essentially what that means is that you have tens of kilometers of tunnel systems under your feet everywhere you go. And then you have another element, you have the element from above. We've had the drone warfare, right? That's being introduced into this conflict like we've seen in Ukraine and Russia. This is what we've seen on the battlefield in Gaza as a new element, so to speak. And it's on both sides. We're using drone technology, Israel is. The terrorists are using drone technology to do attacks from above. And so basically you're encountering threats from you would say 360, but it's like 360 like a globe, right? Like like a sphere. You have to have eyes up, you have to have eyes down, right? And of course, all around from the rubble where terrorists have been hiding in to use for sniping out of, to use for RPG strikes against tanks and armored vehicles and personnel. My team alone, for example, we've had multiple instances where we were attempted to be ambushed, and by God's grace, we were able to identify the ambush, have air support take it out. In some cases, we just got really lucky, so to speak, right? I chalk it off as not luck, but as miracle, because the same routes that we took day after day after day, another unit that did the exact same job as us on the exact same route got hit, ambushed by IED, and then later the terrorists came and started firing at them with rifles and so on, with small arms. So, I mean, that's the kind of reality you're dealing with, and that's the kind of warfare you're dealing with, while all the time, as far as the IDF is concerned, you're trying to be very careful not to hurt the civilians, which are Gazans and hostages. Okay, so those are the two areas where we're trying to be very careful, which is very difficult because the terrorists are actually using the civilian population, theirs, as human shields, and they're also using our hostages as human shields. And so even if we know where the hostages are, we know that the risk reward is way too high, especially now after a few hostage rescue attempts, both successful and unsuccessful. It's just way too difficult for us to try to get our hostages, right, in that scenario, in that reality. So this is something that I know that the U.S. forces have not had to deal with on the same level. It's very unfortunate. It's very dirty. It's very nasty warfare, but it is also very long and grueling because it's not something you can get over with quickly. And that's the unfortunate reality. And that's also why you're going to see on the footage online and stuff that gets out is just mass destruction of structures, buildings, what have you, that looks like an apocalyptic scene. Because like I said, if you do the math, you have miles and miles of underground tunnel systems that the terrorists are using to maneuver in and out with their with the whole vehicles. You can take a whole vehicle, a Hilux, drive it into this tunnel, and pop out somewhere else. And that makes it very difficult, of course, to hone in on where the enemy is, because he disappears one place and then he pops up somewhere else, and it's just a never-ending game of yeah, of just
Kind of
cat and
cat and
mouse
mouse.
kind of deal.
So let's say, as we talked about, that while much of Gaza has been reduced to rubble,
Yeah.
there is still quite a bit that is completely intact. Explain
Yes.
that to our viewer.
Yeah. There's plenty of neighborhoods that have been intact. It's the neighborhoods that the IDF has chosen to mark off as humanitarian safe zones for the Gazans, right? And so the sad reality is those areas you'll have like malls, shopping, like a Walmart where you can shop for food. You have a plethora of everything that you want, contrary to what you'll see online, where they're claiming that there's a famine in Gaza. So first of all, the shelves are just stacked with food. First of all, in those areas. In addition, you have
So
humanitarian.
say that again. In many areas in Gaza, the shelves are stacked.
Yeah. So in many areas in Gaza that have not been targeted by the warfare, you have shelves that are stacked with food, so Gazans can go and purchase the food. And if you see what the Gazans themselves have actually uploaded themselves, and they're showcasing the plethora of food and all the options that you have, you also have about, according to the math that they're giving, it's about 3,000 calories per person in Gaza per day. So that's just from the humanitarian aid that's coming in every day, in addition to all that. So you have stacked shelves, you have tons of humanitarian aid, which comes in the, how do you say, in different types of either food or medical supplies, water, and building supplies. Okay, so you have all kinds of levels of what's known as humanitarian aid. But as far as the food quantity that's coming in, it's 3,000 calories per person per day per Gaza.
So when Israel announced that they were cutting off the aid for the time being, literally within 24 hours, there were reports in Al Jazeera that 3 children died of starvation in less than 24 hours. Like that's not even possible. That's not even possible.
Yeah.
Talk about the potential kind of challenges that Israel's going to have to face in holding the line with this new phase of the war.
Well, I think this new phase of withholding the humanitarian aid, especially the food, is a very, very important move, because what it's doing, it's it's putting the terrorists in a place of desperation instead of being overfed, overtaken care of. Because I can tell you also as a warfighter, okay, so where we carried out missions day in, day out, my particular unit, for example, because we're not within the main groove of most of the base that we're housed at, for example, we don't get to go to the mess hall, grab food whenever we want, because our hours are not ours, right? We operate in, crazy hours. So when we come back from an op, we're tired, we're hungry, we're wounded. A lot of us are wounded just from the missions themselves, not from the enemy, just from the ops themselves. About 8% of my guys have been hurt physically. And so you have all these challenges. So what I'm saying is, I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be cold and miserable. I know what it's like to be tired. I know what it's like to be fatigued. And what I'm saying is, if I can't at least increase that to the enemy tenfold, you're not going to win. You're just not going to win. Because if you're not going to break the will of the war fighters, which are Hamas terrorists in Gaza, then we're not going to end this war. So to end the war, you're going to have to stop the humanitarian aid, because it's not humanitarian. It goes straight to the Gazans. I'll give a perfect example of this, which is displayed perfectly in Ridley Scott's film Black Hawk Down. Opening scene, you have the terrorists in Mogadishu seizing the food supplies going into, they're supposed to go to Somalis. And what happens is, and they put the text, and they're explaining what's happening to the viewer, and they're saying that the terrorists are using the food as as munitions against the civilians, right?
As a weapon.
As a weapon. So they're using hunger and they're weaponizing hunger, I think is how they worded it, something like that. And I thought to myself, when I saw that, I thought, that's exactly it. But the world doesn't get it. The world doesn't recognize this is literally what Israel's up against. We're feeding the terrorists and we're feeding the civilians in a plethora. Like I said, people don't understand 3,000 calories per day is huge. I don't consume that much myself I'm not a small dude.
You can live on half that.
I could live off of half of that easy, and most likely I do, by the way. That's just me. So imagine if you have that much supplies going in, you have basically double of what a human is needing, a male is needing per day per person. So you got to cut that down because, like I said, if they're not feeling the hunger, the fatigue, and when I say they, I'm talking about the terrorists, because the food is getting to the terrorists. So unless the world can figure out a clever way to avoid all the food and all the humanitarian aid going through Hamas, then you're just going to have to cut it off.
That's right.
You're just going to cut it off because they're using it as a weapon against their own people and to arm the terrorists themselves to carry out the war fighting.
Yeah.
So you have to cut it off. You have to do something that is, how would you say, extreme to bring about the ending of this conflict, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but that's just the facts and the reality of what we're up against.
Yeah, it almost seems like that to this point, Israel has been trying to win the war without actually offending the enemy.
Yeah.
And you really can't do that.
Right.
We taught them to do that from our time in Afghanistan, by the way.
Yeah.
So we lost the war in Afghanistan for that very reason, because we kept trying to win the war without offending the enemy. And you have to be willing to not just offend the enemy, but make him suffer acutely,
Yes.
so badly that he begs you to stop. And
Yep.
you haven't gotten to that point, but it sounds like maybe now you are. So what do most Israelis feel about the Trump administration sort of taking the brakes off?
I think I would say that the spirit in Israel is, for the first time since the beginning of this war, is a positive. Again, I wouldn't say most Israelis are Trump supporters, okay? A lot of us see Trump for what he is, kind of like a loose cannon type of world leader, see him as unpredictable. And so Israelis are more, even on the right, we're more moderate, we're more conservative, I guess you could say. We don't like to be too crazy for our leaders. We don't like them to be too wild in their decision making. Israelis are, contrary to, I guess, popular thinking about Israelis, we're actually more center-mindedness, whatever you want to call it. And so I would say it's not that Israelis are Trump fans, but they are very thankful for administration that is finally giving us, the IDF, and our administration, the green light to do what we think is necessary that we need to do to end this war, because we feel that they trust us, they trust our administration to do that, to do what is right, to end this conflict as quickly as possible. And part of that is giving us the munitions that we need, which is part of our agreement that we have with the United States, which is a mutual agreement. We have an arms deal that was made all the way back from the Sinai Agreement that basically was, if Israel is going to give up all of the Sinai Desert to Egypt, America is going to fund both Egypt and Israel militarily, so that basically we feel comfortable to defend ourselves from any future threats from Sinai or any other Arab neighbor that would try to go on an assault against us. So Israel's always playing this balancing act of trying to be ahead of our unfriendly neighborhood. And the way it works with us, unlike with Egypt, where America just shells out money, or like Ukraine, where America just shells out money, so to speak, in Israel, it's actually investments. It's military investments that actually create American jobs. It creates billions of dollars a year for the American economy through those arms deals. And that's how it's actually different. I think this is something that a lot of people,
Well, that $3.5 billion that
they
just
miss.
that $3.5 billion that they just opened up was not a gift; it was a sale. You guys are buying that.
It's an investment.
Right.
I think people need to understand these are investments. They're not handouts, and that's where I think, like I've covered this just lately about the U.S. aid bombshell, right, from the individual from, I forget his name, but Boris something from the Middle Eastern Forum, whatever.
Okay.
Basically, they went and gave a testimony to where all the money is going from their investigations. What we have seen is that the United States, through U.S. aid, or AID, right, not as aid, but has been funding the terrorists. For example, $40 million a week to the Taliban in Afghanistan, in cash, hard cash, because they claim that they don't have banks, that they can properly receive transfers and whatever. I'm sorry, I'm calling BS on that. Are you kidding me? They have billions of dollars and you don't have money or the means to open up a proper bank to receive these transfers so that actually there's clear transparency of where the money goes to, how the money is. Because the thing is, and people need to understand, once the money goes into a bank, what that means is now I can track where it's going out of and paying off whomever, right? When you send a flight full of cash, there's literally not no way, but it is very difficult to track that cash, where it gets handed out, and the payouts to whom it goes to. And we all know, based on intelligence analysis, CIA, former CIA intelligence analysis, special forces guys who have been involved in exposing this, they've pointed out that it's going directly into the hands of the terrorists. So we know this, right? So I think America needs to cut that aid 100% and start to make a revolution on where America's money is being spent. And I know there's a lot of criticism coming towards Israel, saying Israel also needs to be part of that. You know what? We don't need your aid. If America doesn't want to give us money, I'm more than happy for Israel to stand alone and start making arms sales with other countries where we can actually make up our deficit that we need for our defense budget. We can do that. But then that hurts America and American interests in the Middle East. So point being is, people need to understand, this isn't a thing that America, where Israel needs America per se. It's actually America that needs Israel more than anything else here in the Middle East.
So what do you think the next phase of this war is going to look like?
I think the next phase in this war, if managed properly, between the United States and Israel, because both of us have to put our heads together, both of us have to put on our big britches, so to speak, the big boy britches, and make some very hard choices, because I don't think there's a simple solution. And so it means that Trump's administration, Netanyahu's administration, are going to have to sit down and they have to really make some hard decisions, because I think the only way forward to put an end to the war with Gaza, with Lebanon, with Syria, okay, that's being radicalized now by an ISIS founder of the Syrian branch of ISIS in Syria. He's now the new ruler, right? And his operatives have already claimed that they got their sights on Jerusalem, right? On taking over Israel, essentially. So we're in a very, very shaky time right now. Israel and America need to make some hard choices to show that we're willing to make the hard choices that the terrorists themselves have no problem making, right?
So say that again.
So I think Israel needs to make some very hard choices that both America and Israel, which the terrorists have no problem making. For them, they're suicidal. For them, death is glory. It's the afterlife. It's it's a reward. So imagine, if this is who your enemy is, what kind of maneuvers do you need to be able to make militarily to break their will and to stop them? Think about Japan, for example, during World War II. It took an atom bomb to stop them in their tracks. So I'm just asking simple questions like, well, what's it going to take to stop a whole population that is suicidal, including the citizens? We're not just talking about the kamikaze pilots, flying into American warships. We're talking about a whole population that believes in this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've seen in Gaza.
Yeah.
The whole population, all of Gaza, I have not seen one innocent individual in Gaza. That's my witness, okay? Uh-huh. I am hoping and believing in humanity that there are some good people in Gaza, and they're just not going to be, their voice isn't going to be heard, and or if they try to speak, which we know there have been journalists who tried to speak out, and they have been brutally murdered, tortured, and then brutally murdered. So it's
Yeah.
going to take some hard choices.
You know, Trump is talking about moving. We need to move these people somewhere else, and of course,
Yeah.
the Arab countries are saying absolutely not. I
Yeah.
heard somebody the other day say that maybe rather than moving them to Egypt, we should just send them to hell where they belong.
Yeah. So I think a radical move on behalf of the United States and Israel is what many politicians in Israel have been saying for many years, and they have been frowned upon. They have been shunned. They have been ridiculed for proposing what we call the transfer. So the transfer would mean that all of the Gazans, and I would include with that because you're going to have to deal with it all the way through. You can't just stop with Gaza. I would include Judea, Samaria, Palestinian, PA, all those within the PA, they will have to be, in my opinion, transferred back to their original homelands. How do you do that? It's real simple. You ask, you don't even have to ask. You get a registry, right? You look at the names and you match the names to the region in the Middle East where they come from, because every Arab has a family tribal name that connects them geographically in the Middle East where they come from. Okay? And so, real simple, everyone who came from Syria, everyone who came from Iraq, everyone who came from Jordan, everyone who came from Egypt, everyone who came from Lebanon, we respectfully return them back to where they came from. And people need to understand that they've believed in this crazy narrative, this new narrative, okay? It's only a few tens of years old. It's from 1964, okay? This is when Yasser Arafat declared the Palestinian people as a people. So he collectively took all of those Arab people groups I just pointed out, and which, by the way, are the lowest tribal family. They're on the lowest of the honor system within their tribal communities, which is why those Arabs did not want him back after the 1948 war, after the 67 war. So in those two conflicts is where we ended up with an influx of a refugee crisis, because what happened is when Israel wanted to return them back where they came from, these were war fighters. When we tried to return them back where they came from, those countries threatened that they are going to mow them down on the border. That's what Israel was dealt with. So what did Israel do? We took them in. It's not the other way around. This is not your land. You didn't live here for time immemorial or whatever. You have Arabs who have. You have many Christian Arabs. And for example, and they're the ones who have been targeted by the Islamists. And they're the ones who have been displaced by the Islamists in Nazareth, in Bethlehem, as the two main Christian hubs for centuries. Also in Shechem, or is known as Nablus, you had a pretty good Christian community, and unfortunately, they have been bullied out, and they're the ones who have been dwindling.
Yeah. There are no Christians left in Bethlehem, I don't think. I mean, there's very, very few.
Very few.
So,
and whoever's there, they're living under the fist of Islamists. That basically, you say anything against the PA, you're over with.
So talk about this problem in Judea and Samaria and the Hebron. The violence is coming out of there. I think hasn't gotten a lot of press in the United States.
No.
During the ceasefire, everybody thought, all the shooting has stopped. But there's actually been a lot of combat going on in those areas.
So the reason why I'm including Judea and Samaria into what I believe needs to be a transfer of a population, because with all due respect, the reality is, we cannot coexist. There is no two-state solution. Okay, there is a two-state, so to speak. There's a Jewish state, and there's Arab states. There are neighbors, and we're welcome to live side by side, not inside of each other. They cannot live inside Israel, and here's why. Before the war on October 7th, and I've spoken to good friends of mine who were operating in Judea, Samaria, trying to squelch the terrorist activity in these areas. They came under such heavy fire, okay? Such enormous, basically the population trying to lynch them in one of the arrests of the terrorists, that literally the terrorists were throwing grenades into a home where they knew there were their civilians, that could get killed. To this level.
Wow.
All right? These operatives were in such a heavy gun battle for hours, they were down to their pistols. This is just one example. Okay? Why am I pointing this out? Because people don't understand. If you as a warfighter get to the point where you've depleted all of your bullets from your main weapon system and you're down to your pistol and down to your last rounds, that's a very, very bad situation in warfighting. Nobody, I've never been in that situation personally, and rarely have I heard of anybody who has been. But I know of two guys who have been in two separate missions that ended up in something like this. What that means is that the terrorist strongholds in these areas are so strong that you can't even just go in there and arrest any of these guys. It's literally the whole population is joining in and they're terrorist sympathizers. Why does anybody think I want to have this as someone to negotiate peace with is beyond me. You go negotiate with these monsters. You go negotiate with people that are throwing grenades into a home of their family members. You go negotiate with someone where, for example, one of the operatives was trying to help the wife of the home they were in, who was acting like she was in labor because she was pregnant, but she acted like she was in labor. So when the operative medic went to go help her, the terrorist shot the operative in the face.
The lady. No, a different.
The terrorist, the husband of the
Okay.
of the wife,
Okay.
he shot the operative, the Israeli soldier who was helping his wife, because she was doing that to draw the attention away from the terrorists so that they could take care of her, and then the terrorists opened fire on the guy who's trying to administrate medical help for the wife.
Unbelievable.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And we're asking ourselves, are these people crazy? They're willing to kill their own wife in order to get an Israeli soldier. I mean, that's the level of insanity you're up against.
Hatred.
So you go and negotiate with that.
Yeah. You
I'm
can't
not-
reason with people that are just not reasonable.
They're not reasonable. And so they're so hell-bent on killing us, then to me, that is someone you don't negotiate with. That is someone that you give a heavy hand of, you're out of here. You have expunged all of your rights, all of your claim to wanting to live side by side in peace, unlike what we've seen in Hollywood with the Oscar awards and having these Arabs go up there on documentaries on how they've suffered and how they just wish for peace and negotiations. No, they don't. They don't. Maybe that individual that you saw in the documentary, it's possible, maybe. I look at it as propaganda, but hey, maybe that's what they believe. But I guarantee you, because of my personal experience, that's not what the whole of the populace believe in. And I think that's what Israel needs to do. Israel needs to just cut out the tumor that's within Israel, because what happens is these people are carrying out terrorist attacks and have carried out an attempted October 7th 2.0 not too long ago, a few weeks ago, where they had bombs on buses that were supposed to go off at 9 a.m. in the morning. And they also had 5 suicide bombers who were supposed to go off on light rail systems simultaneously during the rush hour on a Friday morning. But by God's grace, these guys made a mistake and put it to 9 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. is what one of the theories is. And that's why the explosives went off prematurely in the middle of the night on empty buses in an open parking lot, that if there were people on those buses, imagine on early morning rush hour, it
I'd
would have
call
been
that a
disastrous.
miracle.
It's 100% miracle in my opinion.
What other miracles have you seen in this war?
I've seen plenty.
Put that in a full sentence.
I've seen plenty of miracles throughout the war. One of the miracles that I saw, for example, was a young soldier that we met, that we evacuated medically out of Gaza, him and his buddy, because they got some shrapnel and whatever. A few months later, he's back in Gaza fighting with his unit, and we discover later, because of the news reporting, that there was a soldier that was hit by a 50 cal rifle round. And so then when we saw him talking, and the miracle was that he was able to survive being hit with a 50 cal rifle round in the torso. Anybody who knows warfare, anybody who's ever been on the battlefield knows full well what happens when a 50 cal round hits you in center mass. You're basically going to get cut in half. If it hits your bone, you're done for. You're not going to survive that. How he survived that is a pure miracle. I went and actually met him in the hospital, and was just reminiscing about, hey man, remember when we evacuated you out, you and your buddy, and I told him, I said, do you know you're a living miracle? And he says, yes, I do. And so he and his family had a celebratory feast to commemorate and thank God for the miracle that their son was spared from being killed by that sniper round. My team has seen many miracles on the battlefield where the enemy tried to get us, and somehow they got discovered, the ambush. We had air support, took them out. We had another attempted ambush in Lebanon when we were serving in Lebanon. We got the radio chatter that they were onto us. And again, thank God they didn't carry out they were trying to carry out their attack, but we were able to evade them and get out of that mission alive. There's just plenty of miracles that happened throughout the war.
That's great.
And I think another miracle that is very rarely talked about is the first responders on October 7th. So I have a good friend of mine. He's one of the first responders. He's the security for the communities and all that. So it's just him and his buddy, the two of them, for, I forget, I don't know, like 4 towns, farming towns. So them stopping a whole convoy of about 200 motorcycle Nukhba terrorists. They're heading their way. They start opening fire, and the first batch that fell stopped the whole convoy. The convoy hightailed and head out of there, and they're like, we're done. You know, we're not going to advance, because in their minds there was a whole division or something there, right, of the military. In reality, it was just the two of them. Had those terrorists continued, they would have eliminated my buddy and his number 2, and they would have just ransacked that whole community.
Wow.
So there's been so many miracles throughout the war, I think, that people miss, because these guys don't speak English. They don't know how to communicate their story. But these are just some of what I've witnessed and had the privilege of hearing their stories.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.